All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're going to get started here in just a minute as people move on over into the webinar here from the waiting room. So just a couple more minutes and we'll kick things off. Okay, looks like people are leveling out here on coming in. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you all so much for taking some time out of your day here to join us for our webinar covering AI in the pension space. My name is Jack Hartwig, Marketing Manager of our pension team here at the Berwyn Group. And we're really excited to have a little panel discussion here around AI, the practical use, and some considerations for you all. Before we dive in, a couple of housekeeping items here. This webinar will be recorded, and a copy of the recording will be sent out right about 24 hours after we conclude today. If you don't get a copy of that recording for whatever reason, feel free to reach out directly to us. We're happy to provide you with that. All participants are in listen-only mode, but please feel free to submit any questions that you do have in the Q&A box down at the bottom of your screen. We will get to as many questions as possible here, and if we will be following up with questions that we don't get to individually afterwards. So if you have any specific questions, just feel free to drop them in there, and like I said, we'll get through as many as we can. We did have a couple on the registration, so we'll address those first and then tackle any ones that come in during the webinar. There will also be a really short survey at the end here for some feedback on what you thought of the presentation and any other questions that you may have. So if a question pops up after the webinar, feel free to enter it in there as well. A little bit about the agenda. We know across the pension industry, AI is moving quickly from experimentation to everyday use, and teams are exploring new tools. Leadership is asking important questions, and plans are thinking more seriously about how AI fits into their operations. And at the same time, this space is built on privacy, fiduciary responsibility, and trust. So, how AI is adopted matters just as much as whether it's adopted. And that's what today's conversation is about. I'm joined here by Dan Urson and Brian Septon, and together we'll be discussing how professionals across plan administration, legal, accounting, and investment roles are thinking about AI today, what's working, what to watch for, and where it can add real value. I'll turn things over here to our speakers here. So, Dan, would you like to give us an introduction about yourself and just kick things off for us?
Sure thing. Thank you, Jack. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dan Urson. I serve as the Chief Information Officer for the Berwyn Group. I've been with the organization for the last 10 years, and I also serve as Chief Information Security Officer. I oversee our engineering teams, our data security teams, and I have the opportunity to meet with many of you. We visit various conferences around the country throughout the year. And in those conversations, when I'm talking to different customers in this space, I find that there's a lot of questions and excitement around AI, but many of them are unsure of how to get started. So that's one of the things I'm hoping to address here today. While there are some high-level guidelines for how to do this thing safely, I just want to set everybody at ease. You don't need to be a technologist to make the best use of this technology. There are some great, simple ways to get started. And so today in this presentation, I'm hoping to go through some high-level concepts as well as some specific use cases so that you leave here feeling empowered for taking this back to your work. So thank you, everyone who's joined, and thank you to Brian for volunteering his expertise to join us today.
Yes. And yeah, thank you again, Brian, for joining us as well. Brian, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and kick us off here with some of the internal considerations as well?
Well, thank you so much, Dan, and thank you to the Berwyn Group for hosting this webinar. I'm Brian Septon. I lead Septon Strategies, an actuarial consulting firm. Aside from actuarial consulting, we also are involved in DB and DC design and lifetime income evaluation, and then we also consult on the administration of pension and savings plans. And I've been an early adopter of technology across my career, and I'm a former chairperson of the Society of Actuaries Technology Committee. I sit on the Conference of Consulting Actuaries AI and Emerging Technologies Committee, and I've spoken at conferences regarding topics such as AI, cybersecurity, and social media, in addition to topics such as actuarial issues, professionalism, and ethics. And so what I'd like to start off with is I'd like to start off with just sort of a very big overview of some of the key terminology. Oh, here's our agenda, right? So we'll cover some of the principles, themes across industry. We'll talk about the models and memories, and then we'll talk about some examples, and then we'll transition to Dan, and we'll get into some institutional considerations as well. Jack? All right, so the key terminology here, what we've done is we've pulled out some of the buzzwords, some of the words you see in the media, some of the things you may have heard about AI, just to sort of define these and distill these, just to sort of get all on the same page. LLMs, large language models, they predict text and generate answers, and they help tailor their answers to your situation. Response drift or model drift is an important term also. What you may have seen with AI or generative AI is that the same prompt can yield different results depending on when it's asked and depending on the conditions under which it's asked. And this is differences in the data, the context, and the memories driving this. Grounding is something that limits AI or generative AI to specific sources, and it limits the outside noise that's generated by external model training. And so we'll talk about grounding in conjunction with chatbots a little bit later. Chatbots are just conversational assistants, but a grounded chatbot is something that we'll give a quick example of, or we'll talk about a little bit, which is where you have a chatbot that maybe has its answers rooted in your plan's documentation. Humans in the loop is just a term that talks about human control before AI action. AI coworkers just refers to using AI as a junior resource, not necessarily replacing the senior resource, but having AI help you. And agents are AI set up to do a specific job, usually routine job with instructions, data, guardrails, and such. So now on the next slide, what we'll talk about is we'll talk about common themes of AI from across the industry. What we've done here is we've looked at how a couple different professions, the actuarial profession, the Bar Association, the AICPA, and the CFA Institute have thought about AI and what type of guidance or information they're talking about with their members regarding AI. And so this slide and the next slide give you a feel for what these various professions are saying. And the papers themselves or the guidance themselves is shown in the links below. So first off, everyone's talking about verifying the output from AI, whether it's talking about validation, independent validation, or being able to explain the results. All the various professions are talking about understanding and verifying the AI results. Protection, or protect, model confidentiality, or data confidentiality is very important. And the American Academy of Actuaries talks about data which might be inadvertently exposed to other users, key consideration. The American Bar Association wants to make sure that your client gives informed consent, and that confidential information is only used with a model with that informed consent. And then, of course, the AICPA and the CFA Institute give similar guidance as well regarding confidentiality. Next, Jack. Communication and disclosure of use. One point here that I really like is I really like the CFA Institute talking about disclosing the use of generative AI or AI towards the idea of building trust. And so certainly disclosing the use and sharing your use of generative AI is something that can help build trust within a relationship. And what you want to do is you want to be able to sort of build on that trust as opposed to using generative AI a little bit behind the scenes. So the communication and disclosure of AI is very important. And then last but not least is the governance, model governance and the supervision, just making sure we're not abdicating our responsibilities towards the governance of the model. We're still using our professional judgment when we look at the results, and human oversight is still involved. So now what we'll do is we'll just talk about two particular models, and we'll talk about the model control and confidentiality of OpenAI's ChatGPT and Copilot for Microsoft. And we could, of course, expand this to be able to include things like Gemini or Claude as well, but we just sort of talk about two models. So here's a couple things that we look at here when we think about using a model. First off, training. Does the model train on your data? And more sort of specifically, does it learn from what you're doing? And by default, OpenAI's ChatGPT does train on your data. It does learn from what you're doing. Copilot for Microsoft does not. Now, within the model that you use, you want to make sure you understand whether the model is going to be training on your data or learning from you. Next is file location. If you upload a file to one of these large language models or generative AI pieces of software, where does that file go? And can you delete it? Those are important questions that you want to be aware of. And by default, things you upload to OpenAI, it's hard. I don't know that you can delete them on command, or you can't delete them on demand, I should say. And so, as opposed to with Microsoft, any file you upload to your own Copilot instance could be deleted either by you or by your IT administration team. So if you have something that you don't want to, that you need to take back, it is maybe dependent on which model you use. Memories are really important as well. And the question is that does the LLM generate memories from you? Can you understand what it is remembering about you? And do you have a way to delete them? And we'll talk about memories again in just one more moment. And last but not least is post-cleanup use. If you've had a conversation with a large language model and you want to be able to do some cleanup, you want to be able to sort of delete what you've talked about, you want to make sure you understand how to do this. Some basic instructions are found here on how to do model cleanup for ChatGPT and for Copilot, but you want to make sure you understand how to do your own model cleanup. And last but not least here, and maybe I'll say this, and it's written here in bold, which is that files, conversations, and memories, they may be retained. It's almost you need to presume they're being retained by the large language model unless they're removed.
Well, that's great. Thank you for that, Brian. Dan, anything to add there?
Question that comes up for us a lot is the distinction between memories and training that we're going on there. So just set those two things apart. If you enter into any of these corporations, often offer a public version of this, free version of any of these jet tools. And as Brian was saying, you should assume that if you're not paying for a tool, you are the product. So it's expected that that the information you're putting in there is going to be used in a subsequent iteration of their model. So that's when I think of training, it's the input I'm putting in there may be used to improve the model for other people. It doesn't just remain within my tenant or my account. It might be used for other individuals. Memories is a concept that is more personalized to your interaction with that chatbot. And so we'll talk in a few minutes about some of those memories, but just to set those apart, the memories are for your own personal conversations. It stays with your account. And training, I think of as it's going to be used for other individuals that you maybe have no relationship with at all.
Perfect.
Yeah, thanks so much. Now let's spend a moment or two talking about Shadow Gen AI and a little bit more about the memories themselves. So first off, what is Shadow Gen AI? Well, it's pulled from the term Shadow IT, and that's using IT, using apps or devices outside your organizational control for organizational purposes. And so this may be exchanging files over Gmail when you can't get a file through a particular email system, exchanging files via Dropbox when you have trouble exchanging files over SharePoint. But that is shadow IT. It may even be texting with a business partner on your personal phone about a business issue. So that's sort of shadow IT. The organization doesn't have control over or knowledge or records of what might be going on. Shadow Gen AI would be the use of generative AI outside of an official organizational environment. And why does this happen? It happens because organizations put up their own guardrails around Gen AI usage. If you work for a large company, you may not be able to just go to Claude, ChatGPT, Copilot, whatever the AI model of your choice, and just ask questions, but you may still be able to do it on your phone or on your personal computer. Now, the issue that we see with this is that the prompts that you enter into your generative AI system of your choice outside your organizational boundaries may become signals or clues or memories that get retained or tracked by the tool over time. And so if you are using Claude on your phone to learn more about a business issue, Claude's going to remember that Brian is asking questions about a particular issue. And the question is that something that the organization would want known by Claude or not? So it's important to be able to explore Gen AI's memories, both within the tools that you use inside your organization and outside the organization. There are ways within each tool to be able to review the LLM's log of its stored memories about you, but that's not even perfect. What I'd like to suggest is asking the LLM, what do you know about me and how do you know it, and be specific. And then along the lines of that model drift that we talked about earlier, you may need to ask this multiple times in multiple sessions to get a really full picture of what the generative AI model knows about you. And then last but not least, what it knows about you may not even be the same list as what it says in the memory. So it's sort of not entirely clear where this is all stored. But that being said, you can ask generative AI to forget certain things, and in the memory log, you can delete memories. And then last but not least, I would say for sessions, consider this prompt. And especially if this is something you want to have confidential or you don't want a memory to be generated, do not create any memories. Please confirm this before I proceed. That would be a way of just sort of preventing new memories for the next session.
That's great.
Okay.
Dan, anything else to add on there, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, Brian brings up so many great points. I'll touch on two of them. One, the shadow Gen AI concept. The first practical note that I'll add to anyone for a takeaway for you when you return back to your work today, if your organization does not already have one, consider adopting an approved organizational tool. What Brian's sharing with us is absolutely right, that if in the absence of an approved tool, employees see this technology out there and they're going to want to find and experiment with it. If you don't give them an approved tool for that, they're going to use something that's unapproved. So any organization should adopt an approved tool, and they should do a security review and a privacy review of how that's to be adopted. Ideally, you can integrate your organization's identity provider for single sign-on, so they're not creating extraneous accounts. But take the time to adopt one or more AI tools so that you're not adopting sprawl across the organization and encouraging the kind of shadowy use that Brian's described. The second piece is on memories themselves. The memories feature is fascinating. And so you may find yourself worried about the privacy of that, but I want to also speak to why it could be a very beneficial thing. So prior to this call, I went through one of the AI tools that I use, and I was reviewing the memories that it had about me. And some of them are very reasonable. It's what is my name? What is my title in the organization? And maybe what teams do I oversee? That's very practical so that it's grounded in my context when I begin to ask a question. If I'm asking a question, it may be very relevant to a CIO to answer it this way. If I'm the CFO, I may have a very different perspective. I'm a sales manager, I may have a very different perspective. So that's a very reasonable place where knowing that context is beneficial. A couple of other notes that it knew about me. I prefer stacked column charts when I'm reviewing budget forecasting. That's a great example. And I'm responsible for overseeing our governance, risk, and compliance team and our annual SOC audit. So it knows the types of things it might recommend when I'm asking questions. Now, one piece that I found fascinating too, I occasionally use generative AI for recipes and cooking, and it noted that I have broccoli. So you may occasionally find it beneficial to look through your memories and kick out things that are not reasonable or are not the way you would capture it, because it's being added to the context every time you ask a question.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that,
Uh,
Dan. That's good to know all that about you. Appreciate it. And so Brian, I'll pass things back over to you for the guardrails.
Sure, and I'll add two more memories which are useful to generative AI helping me, which is that number one, uh, I do not like TLA's three-letter acronyms, and so anytime generative AI introduces a new term, it tells me what it is before it gives me the acronym. That's very helpful to me. And also, I ask generative AI to be direct and to the point. I'm not one that's going to like the very lengthy answers. But those two memories help generative AI answer questions about me, aside from some other contexts it may have. Okay, so back to the guardrails here. Here's just a summary of the guardrails here, and this is basically summarizes what we've talked about in the prior slides. Verify, ask generative AI to show its work, ask for citations, review those as citations, and don't assume completeness or accuracy. Protect. You know where your data goes, know how the memory functions work, or know how to delete memories. Communicate and disclose use of generative AI both within the organization and possibly with your external business partners. Ask them to do the same as well. And govern. Keep the organizational information within the organizational tools and keep necessary paperwork and prompts and responses. And one last point on the govern before we move to the next slide, which is that I have had some of my generative AI discussions disappear on me. I don't know where they went, but there are things that I had used in one day and they were gone the next day. To the extent that you're using the conversation or you want to refer back to the conversation of generative AI in the future, you may want to just do a quick copy and paste or a quick data dump into your own document kept on your own network. It just shows the Q&A. And that way you're not entirely reliant on the generative AI session being available when you need it. Again, that's on the off chance that the session disappears. Okay, so before we get to the next slide, we'll sort of we'll get to a couple of examples here. So actually, Jack, I think we're ready.
Perfect.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Yeah, so we have sort of an overview of the examples here. So we'll do some communication, some content development, writing assistance, and we'll talk about building an agent. And these are things that you can walk away and do this afternoon with generative AI. We will talk a little bit later more about organizational use of generative AI, but these are things that you can do. And one thing that came up the other day when Dan, Jack, and I were talking is that using generative AI is one of the best ways of sort of getting familiar with what the organization could or should do. So it might be worth just testing some of these examples back at your desk or in your office just to get a feel for what some of the possibilities may be. Okay, so we'll start with something fun, communications, newsletter graphics. What we have up here is a generative AI produced graphic that we could use in our member newsletters, or we could use on our SharePoint site, or we can use communication in a communications piece. So this is obviously tied to the Olympics. It's tied to going for the gold and all that. And this is actually this is a good case of prompting being an iterative process. The first version of this graphic that was generated contained a bunch of stick figures and the prompt was about half the size. And so what I did is I built out the prompt to the one you see up there. And by the sixth try, I was able to get the graphic you see on the right. Now, a couple things you notice about the prompt, which are important in the last two or three sentences, it talks about not using copyrighted information, not wanting to use trademarked phrases. We need to direct the AI to avoid those things because a couple of iterations I had phrases that may have been trademarked. It used the Olympic logo, which may have some trademarks associated with it. But clearly, this is sort of a piece of this is something that people automatically associate with the Olympics and something you could use with your member communications. I just put a little bit of additional context in the terms of use just to get a feel for this. You own the generated images, or at least the terms that you say you do. The output may not be unique, but the terms that you say they may be used commercially. So it just sort of the terms of use just gives you some comfort that you can have an AI generated image and you can use it in your own purposes. Okay, next slide would be the specific Q&A or specific FAQ. And so what we have here is we have an example of using Copilot to generate member-specific FAQ. And so what we fed to Copilot is we fed three things about a particular plan into Copilot, which we fed the statutory code, and we fed two handbooks, one for actives, one for retirees. And we wanted to put together FAQ related to the handling of military service under a public pension plan. And so what this enables you to do is it enables you to more quickly generate content for some of the examples or some of the participant questions that may come up in your plan. And so not only do we have the ability to generate content sort of that's used by the masses, but we have the ability to quickly generate a first draft of content that might be applicable to smaller or less frequent situations here. Now, of course, you still want to make sure this content is right, and you still want to make sure that you edit it to reflect your position. But this may help generate FAQ that's specific to participants and specific to situations which are maybe less frequently coming up within your plan.
That's great. Um, on that note, Dan, anything to add to either the newsletter image generation or generation of specific FAQs?
Yes. So on the content generation, one of the things Brian was showing there, I think he mentioned it was his sixth prompt, his sixth iteration that got it there. And so we have this concept that AI is a silver bullet for some of these things, and it's not. It requires that the user knows what they're hoping to get out of it. So it's just one thing that you may see as you're going, say, is it going to do my job for me? No. Creative, curious individuals are still the ones that will get the maximum benefit out of this technology. So unless you know what your goal is and can teach the LLM what it is that it should get back to you, you're not going to get the full benefit of the tool. And the second piece on the FAQ, I think that's an excellent example. There was even a question submitted prior to the webinar, which speaks a little bit to this concept. And so I think we'll speak about this a little bit later. The main piece I really enjoy from this use case of AI is the citation. You can see in the output, not only does it give an answer, but it's linking to the document where it found the answer. It can't be said often enough that it's critical for the user to review the accuracy of the output. So this is an opportunity for you to review if the answer that was given is correct, if it needs additional context, and where it can be found in the document. So I just wanted to point out that additional feature that's very common to these tools to cite its sources.
Fantastic.
Well, thanks, Dan, and thanks, Jack. So we have two more examples here, and then we'll turn it over to Dan. So writing assistance is something that we found to be very useful here. And what I've done here is I've shown the same prompt both with ChatGPT and with Anthropic's Claude. And the prompt is very basic. I work in employee benefits and need to write an email to someone denying a disability claim. So we could just give that prompt to an LLM and have it write a letter for us. But what I found very useful is to ask the LLM to interview me, to ask me a couple of short form questions, which helps the eventual draft of the documents I want be much more on purpose and much more refined. And so I've just shown the example of what ChatGPT does on the left and what Claude does on the right. ChatGPT is going to ask me a couple of questions, and it's going to ask more open form questions. Claude actually asked me a couple of multiple choice questions. And so the actual choices that it used are not shown, but for each of these Q&A you see with Claude, there actually were three choices. And it was actually a little bit quicker, but it didn't give me the opportunity to insert my own sort of flavor to it. And so what we found is we found that this interview process is really useful. If you're writing a biography for your website, can you ask, can you interview me for this? Again, if you need to talk, if you need to send an email on a tough subject, can you interview me for this? Anything that involves your personal voice, the interview seems to be a very useful way to have LLMs help you with the writing. So I think we'll just spend just maybe 2 minutes cruising through the agent process. Yeah, there we go. So agents are customized AI assistants designed for a specific workflow. You give it jobs, you give it an outline of what you want to have happen, and it's basically a specialized AI that does a job well or does a job for you. So, Jack, you want to go to the next? Okay, so what we put together here is we're just showing an example of an agent that is a cross-functional table read agent. And so we'll show you how to do this, and we'll give you the prompt that generates it in just the next slide or two as well. But the concept is an internal agent that gives feedback on ideas, issues, or questions, and it's intended to mirror the perspective of an internal team. And it's really designed to sort of help me as a user of this agent, figure out what am I missing? How might this work out? What might other people think about this? All designed to have faster triage and to be able to sort of better raise issues, or benefits of an idea to me quicker. So what we've done in the next slide is we've put together just the input into this agent, and actually Copilot helped me draft this particular agent for this example. I'll show you how this all folds together with the Copilot agent just for a moment here, but this is the description. It gives a simulated cross-functional read for ideas in a corporate benefits department. It pulls perspectives from legal, ERISA, finance, risk, IT, broader context. It triages the issues. It doesn't offer financial legal advice, but the outcome, as you see on the right column, is a fast multi-lens review. So within Copilot on the next screen, what you'll see is that all you have to do is enter this into the instructions, which is part 4. So if you have Copilot within your organization, the steps are these, 1 through 5. Create the agent, name it, description. The instructions here are sort of the key part of it. And then hit the create button, and you have yourself your own personal agent. And then on the next slide here, and this is, I think after this, we'll turn it over to Dan, just some examples of questions where you can get some quick feedback. Manual disability benefits, how might we automate these? We want to expand retirement benefits for veterans under, maybe what are the key considerations? Mental health benefits, how might people think about this? So on and so forth. So this gives you the ability to get a little bit more team feedback. Or sort of a first pass of team feedback before you need to go have that conversation. And again, it doesn't replace the need to consult with the various advisors on your team. It just gives you a quick leap, or sort of lets you get one step further with your ideation process. Jack and Dan, I think with that, we're turning it over to Dan for the next couple of slides.
Yeah, yeah. And before we do that, Dan, any notes on writing assistants or agents in general? I know that we're going to talk about that a little bit down the road here, but any quick thoughts right now?
Sure. I mean, I appreciate Brian's overview there. I think that chat agent piece is a really great use case. One term I'd like to clarify is agent versus agentic. So ChatGPT came out several years ago, and at the time, many people quickly found its shortcomings. So in say 2022-ish, when everyone was getting really hot about this, they found that ChatGPT was unable to answer basic math questions. If you asked it something like, "What is 1 plus 1?" you'd get 2, because out in the world of its training data, that kind of information was widely available. Quickly, it became clear that it was only as good as the information was trained on and had no other access. Another example is, what is the weather in Minneapolis today? That the ChatGPT was not trained on that; they couldn't possibly answer it. So shortly thereafter, besides just being a predictor of text, developers gave access to tools to those large language models. For example, a calculator gave it access to a weather API, so that it didn't need to know that information. It needed to structure the request and go ask the relevant expert. Ask the weather API, feed this into a calculator, write code to calculate this. Don't try to guess the next character. And then after that, the tool-based considerations came this agentic concept. So in 2025, the hot thing was agentic AI. And so what we've been discussing here is a chat agent, maybe a specialized, a reusable piece of AI. Many of you have worked with Excel for a long, long time, and maybe you had some reusable piece of logic that you built into an Excel macro. You're going to do the same thing over and over again. It's some customized bit of logic that you want to reuse. You could think about an agent that way. You're going to give it the information you want. You're going to do the same thing over and over again. It prevents you from having to repeat yourself. Agentic, the concept that came out in 2025, had more about giving these tools agency, allowing them to go and create, to take actions on our behalf. So for many of us, including myself, I'm still very wary of that. I'm nervous about it taking actions that I didn't give it the authorization to do. But this agent concept of having a specialized tool to do a repeatable process is what we're describing here. I just want to point that part out. If you go back a second, Jack, to what Brian was showing there, some of the interesting pieces you might consider modifying and creating your own agent, you could give it a persona. You might say, whatever I'm going to say, think about this in the most cynical way and point out the reasons I'm wrong. We live in an echo chamber type world, and it's very beneficial to have somebody tell you the reasons you're wrong in a safe place before you go somewhere else and say it. So I find that very beneficial. You might also give an agent access to particular knowledge bases. So perhaps you're going to make a chat agent that serves as kind of a training bot for your organization. You might give it specialized knowledge that when they're interacting with this chat agent, it has access to standard operating procedures, training documentation, other video content like that. And you can also specify the format. Perhaps you know that when you interact with this agent, you're always going to take the output and copy paste it into an Excel workbook. You may say, always answer me in a comma separated format or tab separated so I can copy paste it into something. You can give it instructions like that to be very terse in your response, to provide a particular format, to always do it in a funny voice. You can give whatever instructions you find beneficial. Those are all the types of things you might customize in your own customized chat agent.
Great. Thank you for that, Dan. That's great. And thank you, Brian, for all the great questions and considerations on how to create an agent. I think that's really exciting stuff. With that, Dan, I'll pass things over to you for talking about preservation of knowledge utilizing AI.
Thanks, Jack. So some of the things I find really exciting here is we all can think of very elaborate ways that AI that we read about in the news are being used to really revolutionize how certain things are done. But for the rest of us, they're very practical things that we have to get done when we exit this webinar today. And many of the pension conferences that I attend, a common format is to ask members of these groups to stand up and talk about the main challenges they're facing this year. So some of you may come from larger funds. Some of you may come from really small ones where you probably have individuals in your office that may be up for retirement in the next couple of years. Your office may be 5 or 10 individuals. And the loss of a single senior individual could be very damaging to your ability to continue. And so one thing that I found is a beneficial thing here in our organization is interviewing individuals and documenting that to be used in an AI tool. And what do I mean by that? So you may have an individual in your organization that has all this knowledge in their head and they just know it. And if you ask them to sit down and write it all out, it's not clear you'd get what it is you're looking for, and it would take forever. But an alternative you might consider is open up a Teams meeting or whatever you have, click on the transcribe button so that the audio or video from the call is being recorded, and just ask this individual to explain the things they do day in, day out, where they found it, how they learned it. You can interview someone and get all that information from an interview format like that. And at the end, you'll have a long form, very messy conversation. One of the things that generative AI and large language models are excellent at is summarization and translation. If the information is somewhere in there in a reasonable format that it can understand in English, it'll be able to summarize the high points of it, organize it for you in a meaningful way. And so you could take an hour-long, very messy conversation and turn that into a very useful piece of training documentation. The next slide that we have here is similarly related. It's that you don't need to be constrained in 2026 to simply text formats for the input and output here. The majority of these tools support audio and visual formats as well. So that could be a photograph. It could be a Teams meeting, a video call. So maybe you performed this webinar and you wanted to use that and ask yourself questions about it later. You may choose to scroll the bar to find a specific spot where Brian shared something really enlightening, or you might choose to provide the MP4 of this webinar to an AI tool and just ask the question the way you want to do it. So think about that example when you go back to your day of, it's not about replacing workflows. It's about finding the information you need and asking it the way that you want to ask it. That's an example of something I find very powerful about this technology.
Right.
AI and procurement. So in my role with Berwyn Group, we act as a vendor for many customers, and our customers ask us questions about our internal data security, our AI use, things like that. And so I'm very familiar with both sides of this. We are a vendor and we have vendors. And so I'm familiar with asking these questions and also being asked. When we are doing contract negotiations with our legal team, often these things will come to me and I get to see the types of things that are hanging up these pieces. And so first of all, my observation is that when you're interacting with a vendor, whether you are the vendor or you're trying to work with one, everyone would like to say yes. You're having this conversation because we're trying to adopt a service that would benefit both parties. Everyone would like to say yes. So how can we make that more straightforward? And so we'll talk a little bit about the onboarding of a vendor and the ultimate break of that relationship at the end and some offboarding considerations and when you might entertain certain questions along that journey. So for at onboarding time, when there is an opportunity for contract negotiations, there are a couple places you might consider getting the information that you need or locking that in some way. One place is through a security review. There may be a questionnaire that is industry standard or that your organization requires. You can get the answer to that at a point in time through a security questionnaire. Another place for this information might be in security documentation. You may have policy that you have written or that your vendor has written about how they approach certain things. And then there might be information in the contract itself, a security addenda or some other documentation in the contract itself, which is put directly there for complete clarity. A few places there, again, a security questionnaire is point in time. A policy is flexible and may evolve over time. A well-written policy is concrete enough to be meaningful, but flexible to evolve as technologies change or standards evolve. A policy doesn't change that often. The standards that underlie it may change annually. And then the contract itself is very rigid. If it's written into the contract, it's black and white, it's right there. And so there's a place for each of these. So when you're interacting with these things, what you're looking for in a well-written policy related to AI is some concept of how do they treat and how do they validate the AI tool is appropriate for use. And that goes back to my earlier comment about your organization should have adopted tools that are approved, and you should expect that your vendor, when they're interacting with you or your data, is also using only company-approved AI tools. You should have very reasonable questions about how your data is used in there. And I think we'll have a conversation a little bit later about data classification and how that'll help you think about these questions. It may be a very different conversation if I'm asking about public information in an AI tool versus confidential information, something that is sensitive. Maybe it's a business piece of information, but it's not PII. And then restricted information, which is client PII, something like that you just absolutely don't want to have in an AI tool. And finally, this concept of what you put into a tool relates directly to an offboarding process. Someday, every relationship ends, and you want to make sure that when that happens, that you feel confident that your data is not retained in that vendor system. And the time to really clarify that is in the contracting, in the procurement phase. Ideally, after your relationship with the vendor is completed, you can have the vendor execute a certificate of destruction. All the sensitive and PII, all the information that they have for your members is purged entirely. You have that in writing, and it's gone. Now, if you've not asserted that that organization is not training on your information or retaining it in some other way, it's almost impossible or possibly impossible to extract the information from the training set of any sort of AI tool. And so I know in our own situation, we don't train on any sort of customer PII. We don't. That's not a problem that we have because we've evolved our policies to have that question. But it's a very reasonable question for anyone to have. I think often when we're dealing with vendors or a new opportunity, we don't think about the termination phase as often as we should. We're often very eager to get that contract signed, but this is the opportunity to ask some of those questions.
Great. Thanks for that,
I'll
Dan. That's wonderful. Yeah, Brian, I was going to ask if you have anything that you wanted to add to that conversation.
Yeah, yeah, thanks, Jack. Yeah, this is these are all important considerations here, and I'll just sort of connect this with some of the guardrails we talked about earlier. Um, Getting this stuff set up front seems to be pretty important. Knowing what is allowable or knowing what your intentions are with respect to using generative AI, I think is important. And that way there's just no surprises later on. And some organizations are okay with using generative AI in support of writing, but not with any of their confidential work product, not with anything that's confidential. They certainly can't necessarily say that you can use someone else's stuff in an AI system as well. So I think just getting this set up front is really important and just having a good discussion. We intend to use AI or generative AI to do X, Y, and Z. And the guardrails we have are one, two, and three, and have it set up front. It just seems like a more prudent way to approach this going forward.
Great. Thanks for that, Brian. That is an excellent consideration around this process. Dan, back to you on AI for leaders.
Yeah, one of the things that I found in this journey that we've all been on with AI is that there are certain things that are technology dependent and some things that are, it's not about the technology, it's how we approach it. But one of the things I wanted to make sure that we covered, so as leaders in our own respective organizations, we all expect ourselves and our teams to operate responsibly, ethically, and to really be curious and show the maximum benefit and value for your organization. And as leaders that are introducing these tools and showing the best practices to our organization, we need to embody those same things. And so please, whether it's in your own personal lives or your organization, taking an AI output that you got from ChatGPT and dumping it at someone else shows a lack of creativity and really curiosity in what we're doing there. So I'd really encourage you to take the time to use the AI as a tool to get you started, to answer some questions. But then the next step for every individual is to take that output and very carefully review it. Is it the message I want to send? Is it the right tone that I'd like to embody? Is it well researched? Can I back this thing up so that we're not ever spreading incorrect information or encouraging someone else in our organization to act on something that maybe was a suggestion, but not well backed up? So I just want to leave all the leaders in the audience with that the responsibility that we all have to embody this behavior ourselves.
Great. Excellent. And then for both Dan and Brian, our next piece here is really kind of our knowledge that we want to leave the audience with around organizational use. And Brian, Dan, do either one of you want to take this and kind of walk through our different use cases around different departments?
Yeah, Dan, I could just go through these and maybe you can add some of your experiences in as well.
Sounds great.
What we've done here collectively is we've looked at where organizations can be using generative AI and where other similar industries may be using generative AI that's sort of just on the horizon with our industry here in retirement. And so we broke these down to a couple of different categories here, and I'll go through these. Participant servicing. Obviously, conversational AI can help a frontline call center person learn to be better. It could also help with someone in consulting build up consulting skills. Automatic post casework call, automatic post call casework can help as well to the extent that an AI system is listening to what's going on. It can recommend next steps. Plan document review. This one is sort of something that's clearly attainable right now. If you give Copilot or your organizational AI tool some of your documents, you can look to see if there's any inconsistencies in your documents, any ambiguity. As we talked about earlier, a grounded chatbot would be a chatbot that only answers questions based on the documents you give it. And so over time, maybe that might be something that might be available or might be of use. Organizational intelligence, tracking the call center notes or the web activity. Merging that all together gives you a sense of what participants might be thinking, what members might be thinking. Then, of course, software development, coding is obviously something that is enhanced by AI, and then also creation of synthetic data for testing, and simulation might be important too. And the testing is something where if you have a new payroll interface or you're rolling out a change to a calc engine, AI can be generating the synthetic data to look at all the edge cases, plus or minus a day on your edge cases at the date for your edge case, such that you can run it through your calculator. You do not need to be creating your synthetic data by hand for these tasks. Dan, you had a couple of examples on this. Is there anything else you want to add in?
Again, two things that I noted down. So the example of the phone call or the conversational AI, a couple of use cases that I've seen really very beneficial there is either sales teams or anyone that might have a call center. If you're using an AI tool that can analyze the call back and forth, you may use that to find sentiment analysis. So, what proportion of your calls are angry or they're asking questions? You can get some sort of sentiment analysis there. You might look for recurring themes or keywords, back to the concept that AI is particularly good at summarizing and translating information. Um, Try to extract the key sentiments or the key themes that come out of there. And I can't, my background is in software engineering. And so I can't let the piece about coding go by without having some comments there. I've been very pleased with the way that our own engineering team has adopted some of these tools in the really useful ways that I see it. We read about things in the news about, well, won't software developers be replaced in the next X months? It's always a certain number of months away. And I don't see that that's the case. There's an assumption in that kind of question that the problem that software engineering has always had is that the code need to be written faster. That's not the challenge in most software engineering pieces that I've seen. It's designing of requirements. It's how do we test it? How do we safely roll it out and change management process within the organization? That's not a technology problem. That's a human problem that AI really can't help us with very much. Now, AI can be very helpful in drafting, simplified, maybe the add a button to this website. I've seen that be very beneficial as a good starting point, and then you create with it. I've also seen it particularly helpful with adding test cases. Maybe you've adopted a code base that did not have testing harnesses built into it, and you can use the code and build unit tests around that code so that you can confidently make changes going forward. Those are some really beneficial ways that I've seen it be impactful in the software engineering space, but it's not as easy as AI is going to replace all software engineers by 2027. I don't see that as the horizon.
Great. Thank you for that. And you touched on this earlier, the distinction between classified, confidential data, and how I guess as we look to these different areas that we can entertain the use of AI, how important is that distinction going into these outlining where these use cases may be?
What I would expect is every organization has a set of policies, procedures, guidelines. It's their documentation for how they operate as an organization. One of the important pieces in security policy writing is your data classification policy. How do you analyze certain types of data? And a few of them that I use from our own examples is they may be public information. It's the kind of thing that our marketing team might put on a public website. That's fair game, public information. Another is maybe internal only. It's conversations we have that we wouldn't want to share with a competitor, say, but it's not sensitive in any other regard. A contract with a customer. That's an example. We would call that confidential information, where AI could be a great tool for analyzing, are there strange terms in this contract that we should watch out for? Or how might I rephrase this given this objective that I have? Those are great uses for AI. But then for us, the furthest reach is restricted information. That's PII. That's name, social security number, personally identifiable information. Sorry, Brian, to use the three-letter acronym there. The special information that we want to make sure doesn't go into many of these tools, whether it's an approved tool or not, we just have in our policy, restricted information does not go in any AI tool, full stop. So every organization should consider what they think of as their data classification. We all may have different names for it. The government has, all these different words for it. We have our own. But having that data classification will help you when you're interacting with other service providers in the industry so you can make sure that if you're saying don't use AI, you're being more specific than don't use AI generally versus don't use AI with my highly sensitive or personally identifiable information.
Hmm. No, thank you for that distinction, Dan. That's perfect here. Really, that takes us to the end here, and we'll kick off the Q&A. We have about 10 or so minutes to get through as many questions as we can. So we'll start with a couple that came in upon registration, and one individual was interested in learning about the risks associated with pension boards' use of AI for researching investments, developing investment policy, and finding fund managers, do public pension boards need to advise members that AI tools are being used?
Go ahead,
Let
Brian.
me yeah, let me maybe answer this a couple different ways, or at least sort of maybe from two perspectives. Number one is that AI is democratizing information in a way that the internet originally did in the 90s as well. And so if I'm interested in a topic, I can ask AI or generative AI a question, and if I ask it to cite its sources, I can get something that has some degree of reliability here. So that being said, that doesn't necessarily replace the experts, and you want to make sure you still rely upon the experts for the key decisions, or that you at least sort of you note your reliability, or you know the extent of your reliance on AI. The second thing I would mention is that AI is still making some mistakes, and I just don't know that I make all my decisions based on it. But definitely the idea of education, which I think is the key point. I would say if you're a trustee or you're a person who wants to learn more about something, asking generative AI to do some research. The deep research function, cite your sources is definitely a good way to go, as long as you just sort of in the end you do run conclusions and sort of thoughts by the experts who are there to support you.
Yeah, I would add on to that. A good idea is a good idea, whether it came from a human or some AI tool. And so if you're managing the funds for your organization and you come out with a great idea for how the company can make more money and it ends up doing so, and you got that from yourself or from I don't think that anyone's going to be concerned with where it came from. It's whether it was fact-based, justifiable, and implemented appropriately. So by all means, using AI to come up with better ideas, I don't see any problem with that at all. However, if there was ever a place to double check the output and make sure you're 100% certain that this is a reasonable approach, this is it. Now, one thing that I have seen very beneficial, rather than rely on the numbers or the projections that come out of an AI tool, to ask an LLM to give you a procedure for analyzing a business case framework. So oftentimes when you're assessing some opportunity, you're looking at what is the return on investment I might expect in these scenarios. So rather than ask it for that number, you might ask it, what key parameters might I want to include in this model? How would I assess them? And then I could tweak them and validate that this percentage over here is correct. My total addressable market is correct over here, and fill in those values that you could verify. But you can use the AI tool to give you a procedure to analyze it. That's a way that I've seen very beneficial that helps you with a process and not tries to give you the answer, which may be suspect.
Yeah, I actually really like that. I'll just sort of say that that's a good perspective here. The extent of AI, we ask AI to act like a teacher, or take the persona of a teacher, teach me, as opposed to give me the answers, I think is a really good perspective. So I really like that, Dan. Thanks.
Great. Next question here is, what are the implications inside the US and outside for front-facing employee inquiries? For example, we have multiple locations in Canada with varying union benefits. How could AI aid in pension administration there to existing employees?
Well, I'll just maybe start with a thought off the cuff is that first off, I wouldn't want to deploy AI into a chatbot without doing a significant amount of testing. And so I think that one of the first things I could say is that set up a grounded chatbot or maybe even a segmented chatbot where an employees in organization A or union B get one chatbot, and employees in another organization get a different version of the chatbot grounded in different data is one way they can help with administration, because you can help sort of use the chatbot to address tier one questions without necessarily having to go to the call center the entire time. Beyond that, I think the couple of slides or the slide that we had earlier talked about the idea about using AI to listen in the conversations and generate the workflow notes or the workflow recommendations. I think is going to be an important part as well. And obviously anything that involves engineering or building, AI is there for code development as well. But I think getting participants good information through a grounded chatbot could be something that's sort of right on the cusp or right on the horizon.
I would add on that whether you're talking about state by state regulations or international ones in particular, to be aware of what policies you may be bound by before considering some of those. The most straightforward approach is this is a classic example of what's called a RAG application, retrieval augmented generation, which basically is that the large language model doesn't have all the context you have, but if you can supplement that with documentation, you can get the right answer. The way you might consider that, like Brian was saying, is first empower your internal teams to use a tool that has this knowledge base backing it. Because the participants are going to submit these questions in any number of ways, and that's a good use case of AI. It can translate that to the appropriate way, find the relevant answer, show you the documentation, experiment with that for several months to make sure that you're getting reliable answers. And the final step would be to make that available to participants on some sort of web portal. That's a trickier one. If you were to go that route, you'd want to make sure you have a lot of controls to make sure that it's a read-only environment, that there's no opportunity for it to generate any side effects, this agentic term we talked about, and then you're not making any assertions that you're not. There's a famous anecdote about a car dealership, putting an AI tool out there, and the AI tool agreeing to a very low price for a car. Don't put yourself in a situation where you're agreeing to something that may be ambiguous in a legal sense of what's acceptable.
Great.
I'll add one more thing, which has come up in this situation is that you want to be able to have a log of what's said to the individuals via chatbot, and you want to be able to review it over time and give the model feedback. So you want to make sure you have a feedback mechanism as well. Thumbs up, thumbs down for the answers, just to make sure that you are doing ongoing model training as well.
Perfect. Much appreciated for those answers. We probably have time for just one more. I apologize. I see quite a few questions in here. So we will, like I mentioned, do our best to follow up with you after the webinar on those specific questions. To answer a couple that I see in here, this presentation will be distributed after the webinar along with the recording. So you will have access to that. For just one last quick question here, we'll say, can plans use AI tools to conduct compliance testing?
I think the answer is that if you need an outline, I'm going to sort of build on something we talked about just a couple minutes ago, the teaching mode. And if you need an outline as to things you need to check for compliance testing, or you need to be able to say, tell me more about this particular test, what's important about this DC test, or why is this DB test important? How might I begin the prep work to be able to get the experts to do it? What steps can I take on my own, and where do I need to call in the experts? I think that's sort of a good use of AI. Obviously, you want a person to stand behind your compliance testing. I wouldn't trust an AI to just go do my taxes. I'd still want my CPA to stand behind it. And I would say the same thing about my compliance testing as well. But if this can teach you more about this, or this can let you do some of your own prep work, I think there's possibly a good use for this as well.
Yeah, I would echo that same thing. I might use it to review documentation for what's required against the documentation I have and look for gaps is a good starting point. But to complete the testing overall or to perform that as if it's an answer, I'd be suspicious of that.
Yeah, and I'll mention one other thing, which is that I've seen things about like AI tools can now take the MCATs and the ACT and stuff like that. I imagine at some point in time an AI tool will take the enrolled actuary exams and probably pass, but that doesn't mean that that replaces the enrolled actuary, because you still need that person to be able to sign that Schedule SP or MB. And same thing with all the compliance testing, whether it's an accounting a function or a legal function as well. You still need that person to stand behind it as well.
Fantastic. No, thank you for the thoughtful answers on those. Unfortunately, we're right here at time with just a minute left. And so I just want to take a moment here to thank you, Dan. Thank you, Brian, for joining us today on this webinar. And thank you for the wonderful knowledge presented here. Any final thoughts that you want to leave the audience with here before we wrap up?
I can go first. I would offer, first of all, thanks for joining this webinar. I find this a really fascinating environment. I hope that you've been able to take out something very practical. And again, bring the leadership that we all want to see in the world, bring that to your use of AI, be responsible. And there's a lot of exciting things you can do without having to go into a deep technical dive. So thank you again for listening today.
I just want to thank Jack and Dan from the Berwyn Group for hosting this webinar. And I was just sort of echo the idea of try it. Try some things we talked about today, raise some of the organizational ideas that we had within the organization, and see what you can do to sort of push yourself to the next frontier.
Fantastic. Thank you both so much. Once again, there will be a quick survey that pops up. Really appreciate that feedback. If you want to see us cover future topics or take a deeper dive into any one of the concepts that we discussed here today, call it out, and you might see this crew back live again sometime soon. So really appreciate everyone for taking time out of their day and joining us. And you all have a great rest of your Tuesday, and we'll see you next time.